In this webinar, we'll be working with the IEC 62443 standard, specifically section 2-4, and we'll be working on really understanding how to use that standard and also looking at what the certification process to that standard is like. Before diving into the meat of the webinar, I'd like to just give a very brief background on myself. My name is Patrick O'Brien, and I am a safety and cybersecurity engineer with Exida. My background's in chemical engineering, but I've supported various different roles in both cybersecurity and process safety at Exida. For those who are not familiar with Exida, it's a customer-focused company. And so what we really like to do is we work with our customers using our powerful lifecycle tools, our certification and assessment services, as well as our comprehensive lifecycle services. And so all of these work together and allow us to have a comprehensive view of both safety and cybersecurity. Today's presentation will be focusing in a bit more on that certification and assessment portion as we work with the 62443 standard. Exida is also happy to be a global company, and so we have offices all around the world who work with a very large number of different industries. And then when we specifically think about cybersecurity, there are a couple of areas we want to highlight where Exida can really help achieve pragmatic, practical cybersecurity solutions. So the first would be our consulting services as well as certification, which we will look at more in this presentation. And then there also are training courses, tools, and reference material that can all provide kind of some background understanding and support the completion of lifecycle activities. In this presentation, we're really going to be diving in and working with the 2-4 portion of the standard. And so first we'll look at how the standard is outlined, who it's targeted at, and understand how that intended audience can really take advantage of the standard and achieve benefits by meeting the requirements for it. Next, we'll look at what the process for IEC 62443 2-4 certification is, and understand the steps that are gone through to kind of demonstrate meeting these requirements, and then how certification is issued. And lastly, we'll look at what benefits there are for going through the process of achieving certification, and look at how that can help both the asset owners and the service providers. So to start, we'll really look at the IEC 62443 standard, and specifically section 2-4. And the title of this is the requirements for IACS service providers. So as you may be able to guess from the name, really this portion of the IEC 6244 series has the requirements for the security of providers of integration and maintenance services for the industrial automation and control system. So we're looking specifically at those integration or maintenance service providers. What we can do is we can kind of block these out and dive a little more deeply on really who these groups are that the standard is talking about. So a service provider is really any organization that works with an asset owner, so the site owner or the equipment owner, to install or maintain the equipment. And so that is really where we have kind of these two main types, where we've got integration service providers and also maintenance service providers. And the intent of the standard is that they have the capabilities to kind of understand the equipment as well as the reference models to make sure that adequate security is being provided. From the OEM perspective, they also tend to have internal service provider organizations. And so some of the ways where this standard can be used for them is to help with the reference models or reference architectures that are used to help asset owners understand how to use the equipment. And then additionally, many OEMs have internal branches that they use to actually provide integration or maintenance services for their equipment. And so both of those aspects would fall under the 2-4 umbrella. When we try to look at kind of how the different portions of the IEC 62443 series work together, sometimes it's helpful to have kind of a logical view and take a look at how the different groups work together. And so there are three main groups identified. The first is the product supplier. And so this would be the OEMs who are actually developing individual pieces of equipment or services that systems that are designed to work together. The second party would be the system integrator. And so this is the party responsible for taking those individual components or subsystems and bringing them together into an automation solution. And so the 2-4 standard as well as the 3-3 standard both use the term automation solution. And really what that is either the system that's put together by the integrator or the service that's offered by the provider. And so that is the essentially what is being provided to the customer is called that automation solution. And so then that kind of brings us to the last party in the view of the standards, and that's the asset owner. And so that is the party kind of responsible for operating that industrial automation and control system. So when we look at the 2-4 standard, we're specifically looking at the security program for the processes that the service providers are following. So whether it is the process they follow when they are designing a system to be provided, or whether it is the process they're following for maintenance activities such as supporting with patch management or any sort of change that is going on throughout the operations and maintain phase of the facility. So we're specifically looking at those policies and procedures, understanding the work processes that are going on with the 2-4 standard. Because of that, the 2-4 standard talks more about maturity levels. So depending on how familiar you are with the different IEC 62443 standards, you may have heard the term security levels before. And so a security level talks more about essentially the level of security achieved for a specific device or a specific zone. Whereas a maturity level is talking more about how well-defined processes are and how repeatable it is to achieve that security. And so there are 4 maturity levels defined. The first one is the initial or ad hoc. And essentially that is when the service provider does not have a formal written procedure, and so when a capability is needed, they kind of have to do it on the fly. And so that's not to say that they don't provide good service or that the work done is incorrect, but it's more just that it's reliant on those individuals to perform it and that they don't have written policies or procedures to support them. The next step up from a maturity level perspective is then maturity level 2, and that's managed. So there are written policies and procedure, and then the other key element is that there are trained personnel with specific competency requirements. So those are the first 2 steps to really having a more defined security program. The third maturity level is called defined or practiced. And so this is where all of the aspects from maturity level 2 have been implemented, but then there's documentation where you can show that you've actually gone through and followed this for a specific project. And so in that case, it's not just a managed procedure, but it's actually been something that's been practiced, that's been used on a project. And then the fourth and the highest maturity level is called improving. And this is essentially where a continuous improvement-based approach is used to continually be updating those policies and procedures based on appropriate metrics. So really closing the loop and incorporating whatever feedback is gotten into continuing to improve and make the security program better. In the standard, unfortunately, they don't use little figurines to demonstrate what the different maturity levels are. They have a bit wordier descriptions. So what I'll do is after the presentation, I will send these slides out. And so you can kind of read them in more detail now. But for now, what we're going to do is look specifically at the requirement structure for 2-4. And so they follow a specific hierarchy when going through and documenting the requirements, and that is from a functional area to a topic and then to a subtopic. And so there are 12 different functional areas which are kind of known as the security program. And then within that, there are 40 different topics that could apply to different functional areas. And then under each topic, you have a subtopic. So explaining it this way is kind of confusing. And so what I like to do is go through an example from the standard and look at all of the columns and understand how they work together. So our furthest column on our left is our requirement ID. And so it specifies which security program element we're looking at. In this case, it's the third. and then which requirement under that aspect are we looking at? So we are looking at the third functional area, which is architecture, and then the first requirement underneath it, which is for risk assessment. And so this BR/RE column defines whether we're looking at a basic requirement or a requirement enhancement. And so a basic requirement is kind of, the initial requirement that has to be met for the standard. The requirement enhancements are meant to further define or specify those, or even sometimes modify them to make them more applicable to a situation. So unlike some of the device or system focused parts of the standard, it's not like you have to meet each basic requirement and then each requirement enhancement on top of that for achieving a given maturity level. It's more that you have to identify which requirement and which requirement enhancement is specific to your application, and then provide documentation to show what maturity level is achieved for that. So kind of as I mentioned, the functional area for this is the architecture of the automation solution, and the topic being risk assessment, and the subtopic being perform risk assessment. So basically all of that goes together to say that this capability is looking at whether or not the service provider can perform a risk assessment. The dot question mark is whether or not there is specific documentation that needs to be provided for this requirement. And so because we're talking about the capability to provide a risk assessment, in this case, there's not a specific documentation need. The requirement description then kind of puts together all of these different pieces and describes it in more of a sentence format. And so as we can read from this example requirement from 2-4, it says that the service provider shall have the capability to conduct a security risk assessment of the automation solution or contribute to, in parentheses, participate in, a security risk assessment conducted by the asset owner or its agent. And so essentially what this is saying is when you're the service provider for an automation solution, you need to either be able to go through and conduct a cyber risk assessment on that portion, or if the asset owner chooses to complete that risk assessment, you have to be able to then provide input. And the rationale goes on, and I actually chopped it off here, but it provides kind of an even more in-depth description of that requirement and provides additional information that can help when it comes to really what was the intent behind the requirement and how can you go and meet the intent of the standard. And so what we looked at was one example requirement for the architecture functional area. Within 2-4, there are these 12 different functional areas, so from solution staffing to backup and restore. And so kind of our goal isn't to go through and look at each one of these in depth, but more just to provide an understanding of how the standard is laid out and how the specific requirements can be understood and then met. The real key piece of the 2-4 standard to understand when applying it is that it allows for you to define a specific requirement subset or profile and then focus on meeting those portions of the standard. And the reason behind that is that they understand that not all of the requirements are going to apply to all service providers and asset owners, and that depending on what the asset owner wants, they can request just a specific subset of the required capabilities, and then specified Annex A is the portion of the standard where all of those requirements are listed. And so essentially what it's saying is you can define a specific profile, and these can either be defined by IEC technical reports, or the standard goes on to say that individual sectors, service providers, their asset owners can actually define their own profiles. And so what that does is it gives people a lot of flexibility to identify what the most important portions of the 2-4 standard are, and then make sure that they're meeting those requirements. And so kind of the key takeaway is that common sense is allowed, and really the process of going through and identifying what key portions of the security program need to be met is very helpful both for identifying what areas to focus on for the requirements, and also then specifying to asset owners what the services provided and what those capabilities are. So to kind of provide a graphic representation of how this is done, we can think that first we start with the table of 2-4 requirements. And so there are 72 basic requirements, and then a number of those have requirement enhancement as well to kind of specify them further. And then so the step would be to identify what specific requirements apply to either the industry or application, and then use that to define a service provider or asset owner specific profile. And so this would have just the requirements that are needed to really show that there's a sufficient and robust security program for that application. So that kind of gets us through how to really look at the 2-4 standard requirements to understand how to use them. The next step that we'll look at is then how do you go through and achieve certification to the 2-4 standard. And so it's helpful to kind of take a step back and think overall about IEC 62443 certification programs and answer some of the first basic questions about it. So the first question is, really, what does it mean for certification? And so simply defined, certification is when an accredited third party attests that the requirements for an independent international standard, typically in this case for cybersecurity, we're looking at IEC 62443, to show that those requirements have been met by the service provider. And so for cybersecurity certification, there are typically 3 parts that are looked at. A detailed analysis of the engineering process, an evaluation of the cyber defense mechanisms, and then a look at the overall network robustness. And because for the 2-4, we're looking at specifically the security program, the emphasis is really on the analysis of the engineering processes in this case. And then for each certification program, the requirements for this program are called a scheme. And so this is essentially taking those requirements from the standard and documenting them, as well as documenting any additional requirements to show really meeting adequate security. If you saw the word accreditation on the last slide, that can also pop up a question. So what does it mean to be accredited? And so essentially what that is when an accreditation body audits and accredits a certification body. So it's how you know that you're not just getting a certification to kind of any requirements. It follows a set quality management procedure. There's processes that are in place to make sure that certifications are done consistently and correctly. And so the certification bodies to receive this must operate the certification program under ISO or IEC 17065. And so exida is an accredited certification body for functional safety and cybersecurity per ANSI. And this is our kind of the United States IEC liaison. And so even though ANSI is located in the United States, because it is a member of the International Accreditation Forum, or IAF, most countries around the world who are signatories of this IAF have multilateral recognition arrangements, or MLAs. And essentially what this means is any country where IAF accreditation is accepted, ANSI accreditation will also be accepted there. And so it's important to understand when getting certification, really who will credit that certification, who will approve that and allow that to be used. exida has a lot of experience with certification both in functional safety and cybersecurity, and we are currently the global market leader for logic solver certification. Additionally, we have performed more automation cybersecurity certification than any other certification body. And so we do have a lot of experience with the certification and understand what it takes to have a successful IEC 62443 certification standard. So just to kind of summarize those information on the certification program that we went through, essentially it's a third-party technical expert attestation to compliance against the IEC 62443 requirements, considering the analysis of the engineering processes, the product design when we specifically look at a product or system certification, and then also the network testing. And so what this leads to are 3 different main categories of cybersecurity certification, all of which are portions of the IEC 62443 standard. So the first is process certification. And so this is what we were talking about with the 2-4 standard, looking at certifying the processes used in the security program. The second type of certification is the device certification. And so this would be certifying the security achieved for a specific device. And then the last type of certification is the system certification. So certifying a group of components working together or a network to show that the overall system has achieved a certain level of security. When we look at where 2-4 applies to these security schemes, we can see kind of two main areas where it comes up. And so the first is the system process certification. And so this is kind of really what we're focusing on in the webinar today, looking at how you certify the security program and the actual processes that service providers follow. It also comes into play for integrated system certification. And that's how, when they look at the overall system, they know that they've met their engineering and development process requirements. And so what we've seen is there are a lot of important connections between the 2-4 and 3-3 standards that kind of align the process elements defined in 2-4 with the capabilities of the overall system and those security requirements, which are defined in the 3-3 standard. And so those two portions of the standard together are what allow for an overall certification of an integrated system. So when we look at the security program certification for integrators providing either the integration service or also maintenance service, we're really talking about a certification to a given maturity level. And the starting point for the certification really starts at maturity level 2, because the initial ad hoc essentially means that you do the capability when it's needed, but you don't have any documentation. So really the starting point for kind of demonstrating the capability and receiving certification is maturity level 2. And so that means having the written policies and procedures to follow, and then also having the trained personnel and the competency requirements so that you know when you're going to go through and follow these procedures that they have the necessary skills. From there, if all of these procedures are in place, there are trained personnel and they're actually going through and completing that. If there's documentation of it being used on a real project, that would be kind of what's needed to demonstrate maturity level 3 for a requirement. And then for maturity level 4, it's everything that would be looked at for maturity level 2 and 3, and then also showing the appropriate documentation of what metrics are being tracked and what processes are used to continuously improve the security program. And so to go through and get certified to any of these maturity levels 2, 3, or 4, there's a set process that exida will follow and go through to certify to 2-4. And so the first step is to go through and do a gap analysis to get an understanding of really where your security program currently is. From there, either training or workshops can be used as requested to provide more detailed information. And then the process security case is defined. All of the kind of important documentation and artifacts for showing compliance are pulled together. And this can be iterated until you've got kind of your final process security case. And then this final process security case is what becomes audited. And if you're able to show that all of the requirements are met, then certification can be issued. When we talk about the gap analysis, we're really doing an evaluation of the current practices against the 2-4 standard. And so it's kind of simple to think about it almost like a stoplight, where there might be 3 outcomes for a given requirement. A yes, there's clear documentation and you can see it's being followed. Maybe where some of the pieces are there, but you might want to develop a little bit more documentation for the actual certification assessment. Or no, if there's an area that's not currently being done. And so the purpose of this is to really highlight the current strengths and weaknesses and document what areas need to be focused on so that certification can be achieved. Now, training and workshops can be used if you go through and look at the results of the gap analysis and think to yourself, well, what if I don't know how to fix a specific concern from the gap assessment? Say, the gap assessment went overall very well, there's a lot of documentation there for many of the requirements, but it gets to something like a cybersecurity risk assessment, and you're just not too sure how you would go about actually completing one or being a part of one. That would be something where a specific training or workshop could be used, additional information could be provided, and then as a result of that, you're really developing the capabilities and learning more about how to implement that part of the security program. From there, once everything is put together from the gap analysis recommendations, any training has been gotten if needed, then really that final process security case, which is comprised of 6 different elements, is audited to make sure that all of the requirements are met. And so the first portion is the security management plan, which can be thought of kind of similar to a functional safety management plan, but provides the overall requirements for providing security capabilities. Next, the life cycle model. So both the cybersecurity and functional safety standards are very big on following the life cycle approaches because they know that safety and cybersecurity aren't just individual actions. And so they need to be able to fit in throughout the analysis, design, and operations phase. So showing how the service provider fits in with a life cycle model is also an important part of receiving certification. Next, the process security documentation. So the specific documentation for each requirement showing that that is there. The overall master quality plan, which is used to ensure that the services are provided consistent with the overall quality and are done consistently. And then, so for example, the threat and vulnerability analysis, like the example we looked at where there's the capability to provide a cybersecurity risk assessment if asked, or to be a part of the cybersecurity risk assessment team. And then lastly, the security enhancement user guide. So essentially, it can be thought of as the cybersecurity equivalent to a safety manual, but it really provides that added information of how the asset owner can use the automation solution and follow it to make sure that they are achieving enhanced security. And so after everything is gone through kind of with that fine-tooth comb, if all requirements are met, that is when certification would be received. And so the process for this is that the maturity level for each requirement and the profile being certified to is looked at and determined. And then the certificate is going to be issued based on the lowest maturity level achieved. Because if you're maturity level 2 in some portions and maturity level 3 in others, you're not yet ready to be certified to maturity level 3, but you can receive maturity level 2 certification. And then additionally, those areas where a higher maturity level have been achieved are documented in the certification report. And so not only do you then have the certification to maturity level 2, but you have the capability to demonstrate to asset owners that for specific requirements that you focus on, that not only have you reached maturity level 2, but you actually have everything in place for maturity level 3. And so that can be used to really demonstrate the quality of the security program even further. So that takes us through really what the process of receiving certification would look like. And lastly, we'll focus on what the benefits are of going through and receiving 2-4 certification. So the first and really one of the key requirements is that it protects your solution provider business. And so by following 2-4, you're able to demonstrate that you have an adequate security program and help protect yourself from cybersecurity liability. Additionally, meeting the intent of 2-4 really is a market differentiator for solution providers and sets yourself apart from other service providers who may have similar offerings. And so to look at both of those, the IEC 62443 2-4 certification is a structured, auditable, and repeatable approach for evaluating the security and demonstrating that the practices followed for the integrator really meet up with this benchmark. And so not only does it allow you to really show that market differentiation, but it also goes to improve the security program. And so if you look a little bit more at the specific benefits to the service provider, we can highlight a couple. So one would be recognition for the effort that really goes into developing robust cybersecurity programs, cybersecurity policies, and following those and taking credit for that. Additionally, it can build those security program elements into the development processes and actually continually help security to improve. Again, kind of as I said on the last slide, really a service differentiator and demonstrating that level of cybersecurity awareness and focus to clients. Another key area is that it can actually help reduce the support costs for meeting cybersecurity requirements. So by moving out of that ad hoc stage, you don't need to be scrambling and spending additional time each time a security capability is requested. You already have the procedures in place and the competent personnel with the training to actually go through and implement that capability, which reduces the cost of supporting it. And then lastly, kind of the goal of this 2-4 standard is really to focus on increasing the overall maturity level. And so by developing that continuous improvement process, you'll really just continue to improve security and really break out of having to immediately modify things or really doing that ad hoc approach where additional time is needed to kind of figure out what's going on. Additionally, any person who goes through and receives the security program certification also can be included on the security automation and equipment list. And so this is another way of really demonstrating the service quality and security, emphasizing a proactive approach to cybersecurity, and it helps to expand into a security critical market by demonstrating that security is a main concern for a service provider. And so that kind of is, you would automatically be included on that security automation equipment list, and that can help really demonstrate the security elements of the program. And a lot of the benefits to the service provider are really that it makes the services more valuable to an asset owner. And the reason that that's true is because it helps them actually go through and specify the security requirements and actually build that into the request for quotation, so they're able to identify what service providers are able to meet their security needs. They'll spend less time doing factory acceptance or site acceptance testing. It can help a more smooth transition of that part of the life cycle. It ensures that they have a known starting point for the cybersecurity programs, and so they understand the level of security that's being followed when the system is actually put together. And this really improves the cybersecurity assurance for the services that are provided to the asset owner. And then lastly, really the act of going through and getting that independent expert assessment provides further confidence in the level of security followed for those security programs. And so when we look at those benefits to the service provider as well as the asset owner, we can kind of see something that was specifically highlighted in the 2-4 standard, and that's really the goal of improving cybersecurity negotiations about requirements. And so the asset owner is able to see a set list of requirements, can identify what specific security requirements are needed for their application, and then they can go and find a certified service provider who really demonstrates that they have the capability to meet that need. Additionally, it allows for the security responsibilities to be more clearly defined at the start of the project. And so that can really help with the discussions and understanding who's responsible for what parts of the cybersecurity. So in summary, this presentation first started out by going through and looking at how the IEC 62443 2-4 standard is organized and how it can be applied. Next, we looked at what the process for going through and receiving certification to this standard would be. And then lastly, we kind of talked briefly on what the real benefits of going through and receiving certification are. So what I will do now is stop and briefly look at a few questions, and then from there we'll kind of continue with the outro slides. So one question that I see now is, I'm a functional safety manager, and it's kind of, okay, so the key is understanding the impact of cybersecurity for safety critical systems. And so this question is actually for, is there personnel certification or training required for cybersecurity? Is that offered? And then some more information on that. And so actually what I will do is, since that's kind of covered in my last couple of slides, I'll keep going and then circle back to this and any other questions. So let's see. So just to summarize kind of the different things that exida can do to support cybersecurity. First, we'll look at the consulting services. So holding those cybersecurity workshops and looking at, helping to understand really what the standards are asking for and figuring out the best, most effective way to meet those requirements and really achieve a benefit from it. Performing gap assessments, going through and actually doing the cybersecurity risk assessments or cybersecurity vulnerability assessments, and then taking those requirements and putting them into further life cycle steps. Additionally, for the cybersecurity certification, kind of as we looked at, there's process, device, and system certification. When we're thinking about service providers or system integrators, kind of the two that are really important to look at is the system integrator process to 2-4, and then the integrated system security certification. So actually certifying not just the process, but actually the overall system to a security level. There are a number of cybersecurity tools and references. And so the book implementing IEC 62443 does a really good job of kind of looking at how to take those requirements from the standard and understand how to apply them. There's also the Excelentia tool has a cyber module that can support cyber risk assessments and cybersecurity level verification. And then there are also a number of policy and procedure templates that can help with developing the security program. So kind of to get back to that question about the cybersecurity training, yes, exida does offer a wide variety of training courses. So the first course, CS 101, is really just an introduction into IEC 62443 cybersecurity. It does a high-level overview of what different portions of the standard are and the steps that go through to try to meet these requirements. CS 102 looks at the IEC 62443 cybersecurity lifecycle and really focuses on how asset owners would meet the requirements for 2-1 for the overall security management system, how they would go through and perform cybersecurity risk assessments and the other lifecycle tasks, and also looks at kind of how cybersecurity, the lifecycle, also relates to the functional safety lifecycle, because really that overlap is very key, and understanding how those requirements affect both the safety system and the BPCS can be very important. For CS 201, this is looking at security software development, so would be more targeted towards original equipment manufacturers, and looks at how you meet the intent of 4-1 and 4-2 for really developing and producing secure equipment. CS 203 kind of also would apply to cybersecurity asset owners, and it looks at what specific elements of the cybersecurity policy are needed for employees and contractors. CS 204 also ties into the 2-4 portion of the standard that we looked at today and section 3-3, and it really focuses on providing cybersecurity for integrators and solution providers. And then the last course, CS 241, kind of goes through how to actually use the Excelentia Cyber tool to perform cybersecurity risk assessments and security level verifications. And so in addition to providing those training courses, exida also has the ability to provide personnel certification. And so the certification program for cybersecurity is called our Certified Automation Cybersecurity Expert or Specialist. And so if you're familiar with the functional safety sides of things, these are really the CFSE and CFSP equivalents. And so there are 3 specialties of this exam. It can either be taken for automation cybersecurity, so thinking of it more from an asset owner perspective, from integration cybersecurity, so for that service provider who's kind of designing and putting the system into practice, and then the software development cybersecurity, so more focused on the specific security requirements for those devices. In addition to our personnel certification, we also have a cybersecurity practitioner certificate program, And so what this allows people who take our training course to do is they can take a 20-question quiz at the end of the course, and then it's not a full certification program, but they can show a certificate that demonstrates that they attended and understood the cybersecurity course. And so when we look at kind of these personnel competency parts of the program, it's essentially a triangle. And so what the CSP does is it allows you to demonstrate that you've taken that initial course. And then from there, there are study guides and additional trainings that can be done to go through and take the CACS or CACE exams. So if you're interested in learning any more about the actual 2-4 certification or the cybersecurity training and CACE exams, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions. My email is on the screen, pobrien@exida.com. So please feel free to shoot me any questions and I'll be happy to get back to you. Also, feel free to call the office and we can speak on the phone and review those questions as well. For all the latest information for Exida, please check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and also check out upcoming courses on the Exida Academy. There's online training courses that you can see what open enrollments are scheduled and try to figure out a time that meets your needs. And if you don't see any courses listed here that you're interested in, please feel free to go to our website, exida.com/training, and look at the full list of courses being offered. So now what I'm going to do is go back and look through the questions and make sure that hopefully I got to them all. And so let's see. So the first one was kind of focusing in on those training programs. And so hopefully that those last couple of slides provided a good understanding of what training courses we give and the ways for kind of demonstrating what portions of the standard are covered. One question is the training available online? And so some of the training courses are offered online. So CS201 is offered as half-day online sections. The Extension Cyber training can be provided online. I don't know if the other training courses we have are currently offered online, but that is certainly something where if there is an interest, we can look into developing them for an online offering. For the exams, it depends for each type of exam. So for the CSP questions, if the course is taken in person, then there will be a paper copy of those 20 multiple choice questions that are handed out. And then so once those are filled out, they'll be graded by an independent grader. And as long as an 80% is achieved, then the CSP will be issued. For the CACS and CACE exams, they are offered at training or at testing centers. And so the CACS exam is a 4-hour exam that is 60 multiple choice questions, and the CACE exam is a longer exam that is a total of 100 multiple choice questions. And so similar to the CFSP exams, there are set training locations around the world where the exams can be taken. And so those are then sent to be evaluated, again, by independent graders who you don't see any information about the person taking the exam. They just simply get everything that's written in the exam and then are able to go through and provide a score. And so for that, there are kind of also additional requirements, but those can be found on the Exida website as well under the personnel certification page. So the other questions that let me look through. Okay, so actually there are a lot of questions. Let me see if I can expand this to make it larger. Okay. So to what equipment level will this certification be required? Is it required for field devices? And so that's a really good question in terms of what actually needs to be certified. And so from a holistic perspective of thinking about IEC 62443, yes, it does provide the ability to actually certify those individual field devices. And in terms of the textbook answer, we would say yes, that anything used within a security zone with a set security level should have testing done to demonstrate that it meets this requirement. And so that would be thinking of, say, smart field devices where there are potential maybe wireless inputs or other things that are done. If it's a pneumatic device or some sort of field device where there is no potential entry point, then that would not necessarily need to be certified because it would kind of be inherently secure in that way. Let's see. From the process perspective, the goal really is to have kind of a certified process, so regardless of what equipment is being implemented, that you know that the actual design process and the development process followed for that equipment was secure in nature. And so sometimes for devices where there may not be specific security level certifications available yet, actually using these process certifications such as 2-4 can be really helpful in understanding really the security elements that have gone into it. And the last point then is that specifically what the asset owner needs to see certified will vary from asset owner to asset owner. And so they are really, they're pushing really what needs to be certified and asking their service providers to really demonstrate certification to the 62443 standard, as well as then requiring that specific components are at a defined security level. And so that really will be kind of a market demand that's also driving certification. The one question is there a publicly available register that lists OEMs and system integrators that have received cybersecurity certification? And so for every OEM or system integrator that has received cybersecurity certification from exida, those are included on the security automation equipment list. And so that is a website maintained by exida that documents where all of these OEMs and what their certifications are. It also includes certifications to the exida security schemes and also the ISA security schemes done by exida. I do not know if the certifications done by other certification bodies are available online. So I'm not sure if there's one register that has everything, but I do know that everything that exida has certified is available on the security automation equipment list. And there's also kind of a safety automation equipment list. And so sometimes we hear from asset owners that they're actually using those to identify what safety pieces of equipment to use or what service provider capabilities are available. And so that is a really good way to actually find what OEMs and service providers have received cybersecurity certification. So thank you very much for all of those questions. I'm not seeing any others, so if you have a pressing question, this is kind of your last chance to put it in there. The slides will be sent out following the presentation, and so please review those, and if you have any questions, definitely reach out to me and I'll be happy to answer any further questions. So thank you very much all for your time, and please enjoy the rest of your day.